My name's Peter Weddle, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here. We have a large audience from all over the world, and that's no surprise. I've been in this space for a very long time, but my guest today has been here much longer and is much better known. So please welcome Jeff Taylor to the virtual stage. Jeff, nice to have you here.
Thank you, Peter. I appreciate you. And I was excited to get a call from you back 5 or 6 months ago. And it felt like a warm call from my past experiences, which is great. And I'm looking forward to coming and speaking at your conference in San Diego. And I honestly, I can't wait to be back with the TA teams that are the leadership teams that are there. And thank you for reconnecting.
Well, you're most welcome, Jeff. Truly, you're going to be speaking not just once but twice at the conference. Which, for all of you out there, it's coming up on June 3 through 5 at the Mission Pacific Beach Resort in sunny Oceanside, California. So I hope you'll consider joining us. What we're going to do today, without giving away the script, but we wanted to just share with you a little bit about what Jeff is going to be speaking about at the conference. So why don't we begin with what you're up to now? It's called Boomband. What's that all about?
So Boomband comes from the Dr. Seuss book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And at the end of that book, it says, don't go to the waiting place, go where the boom bands are playing. And it always kind of like, since I got that book, I think as a graduation present in high school, it's always meant to me this kind of big active place where you go to be found, to be discovered, and to kind of trumpet your success. And so in thinking about the origins of Monster, it was about Trumposaurus was to trumpet your success. And here we are 25 years later and thinking about it. And one of the things I love is boom actually translates into the top 8 languages. So not only as a kind of life and career platform that's going to be here in the United States, but also all around the world, I'm excited to introduce this new idea. And we're building, I'm really amazed that and kind of shocked at how little has changed as I come back into the space. And I would like to build a consumer brand, a seeker, I call them player brand that focuses and builds a marketing platform for each individual. And that's going to be my kind of maniacal focus, kind of as it was when I started Monster, on the seeker. And if I do that well, the companies will come around in droves. And so that's that kind of white hot center that I'm trying to focus on.
So what kinds of products and services will there be on Boomband?
So I think the right way to kind of answer that question is, let's look at the tools that exist, because I'm going to be kind of resetting some of those tools. And the first thing we talk about is the failure of the resume, and this idea that your resume is 85% historical. We used to really joyously talk about that as the track record that you had, but no person really wants to be matched against that track record today. So your typical profile on LinkedIn or resume is 85% historical and 15% current. And so one of our first introductions is going to be an all new, let's almost like an investment document, a newer invention of the resume that focus 80% on current, 15% on future, and 5% on historical. And so the idea is, what is it about your current? So that means a lot more focus on hard and soft skills, a lot more focus on your side hustles and your passions and things that you do in your whole self. And so the idea of creating a much richer document that then has much more focus on what you want to do as opposed to what you have done is going to be at the center of our product. Also, we're seeing the job posting as being kind of a center of the challenge now, where it was the center of the solution when I started. And the idea of doing a job announcement out in the marketplace and having the frustration of getting now hundreds of applicants an hour and not knowing where the quality is in that is actually become just over the last like 6 months, I think, really an untenable problem. And I think that there's kind of a melting down of the systems right now as a result of that. So we want to actually switch that around, think more about job signal, think more about the quality of a large kind of pool of talent, and how do we get to the most qualified people as opposed to the people that are actually applying for the jobs. Now, I think what you would say in that is, okay, that's just passive and active job seekers. But I actually think that that is going to go away as we think about this process. And we're going to start thinking about more like propensity to move. At what points in your career are you more or less willing to move to other opportunities? And how do we present that signal and then get to the best people that are available? And all of this, as you talk about it, sort of seems like the normal process. It's a buyer and a seller. And how do you do a better job of positioning either side? And one of the things I always laughed about is I never know who the buyer and who the seller is. But right now, what's happening in the market is there are more seekers. So we have a supply opportunity right now in the marketplace, which is great for companies. But at least initially with the older tools, what's happening is that higher supply, which should be magical, is actually becoming a huge problem dealing with all the volume with the tools that we have today.
And I couldn't agree more that part of the problem is the job posting itself. I mean, we talk a lot about matching, we talk a lot about the resume, but at the end of the day, the initial document in the whole process is that job posting. And I think, the problem is that today's job postings really don't speak to aspirations. I think instead of a job posting, we ought to be talking about a job deal. What's a good deal for a person, whether he or she is an active or passive person in the marketplace? And in
Right.
order for a job deal to work, you've got to answer 5 questions. Most job postings do not. They do answer the first question, what will I get to do? But they don't answer what will I get to learn, what will I get to achieve, with whom will I get to work, and how will I be rewarded and recognized for my contributions. I think if job postings became much more focused on answering those 5 questions, we'd see a shift in the response rate among applicants.
Yeah, I particularly like one is like, who will I work with? And to whom I will work. And so I see the idea of mapping the talent and thinking about building a two-sided knowledge graph where you could have individual, I call them players, actually you work on a team, and I know all the people that work with you at your company. So there's some validation opportunities with that. I also know when you're looking at an opportunity, not only would you like to stare at the opportunity, but I said this in one of my posts, I'd actually like to know the hiring manager that I'm going to work with. And I'd like to know about that hiring manager. And I'd also like to know about the team that I'm going to work with. And I'd like to be able to go and explore their profiles. And so I start looking at one of your points, which is the idea of who am I going to work with. And I think that a system that actually allowed you to learn that information would start to get at some of the cultural kind of impact that you could have and the alignment, which I think is just nowhere right now. The other thing I find in the learning component is that I think this idea of culture add versus your culture fit, I think is really good. And a big part of that is going to be the company's openness and excitement about learning what you know that may not be exactly what is required in the skills to some extent and the abilities that are required in the job posting. And so I think the 5 things you just shared, you shared in one of your posts, if I remember right. And I agree with those things. But I think there's even more. We have to empower both sides so that the company can learn more about the individual because they don't believe what's written there for the individual in that resume. And then for the player, I think they need to understand more the dynamic and what are they going to learn, how are they going to be taken care of, how are they going to be empowered in this job. Again, the experience that I have from, I don't know, almost 40 years starting as a recruiter and going through this process and understanding the buyer and the seller deeply. And, maybe we talk a little bit about the history here and then, think about how we juxtapose that against the present time, which is why I see a big opportunity in the marketplace.
Well, as I'm sure you know, the job seeker space is pretty crowded, has always been in terms of products and services for people looking for a new or better job. We've always had career counselors online, we've always had resume services, and now we have AI application bots and AI interview schedulers and so forth. How's Boomband going to stand out in this crowded marketplace?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of kind of core things. One is there's an awful lot of small kind of middleware add-ons that always come into the marketplace on both sides. But for whatever reason, no one really takes a big swing at building a new consumer destination, a new marketing portal, a new marketing platform for seekers. And I'm not quite sure why that is. Building a two-sided marketplace is very difficult. The idea of actually figuring out how to attract 150 million people into your product is a daunting task. So most people just never even kind of take up the cause. And so one of the things that I have in my DNA is, to start that process and to build value, and then to build that value in the Boston area, and then New York, and then in Austin, and in San Jose, and ultimately in Canada, and then up into 40 or 45 different countries. So I would like to do that again. I have some challenges with that. It's a different era than when I started Monster. But I see a lot of the same characteristics in the marketplace. And so I see some opportunities here to kind of build from scratch. And to some extent, I'm hoping a lot of the people that are on this call are up for something new, because I think we're exhausted by everything that currently sits in the marketplace, and there aren't really new choices. I'm going to map 150 million workers in the United States. I'm going to map the whole workforce. I'm going to train a model on a little bit over 2 billion records. I'm in that process right now. And I'm going to create an arena for buyers and sellers, so where companies can actually look for top talent instead of random talent. And seekers can actually answer that question. When somebody recommends, you should make a list of top 10 companies that would be good for you to work for. And every seeker says, you're right, and has no idea how to do that. And so I'm going to try to understand the marketplace, 16 million companies and 150 plus million seekers, and use the AI tool set to do a better job of building in what's called a metric space and build the semantic closeness, not to do robotic matching, but to actually create a marketplace where you can play. I want humans to play in that marketplace and to be able to explore. And I want the systems to work in the background to be smart and empower both sides to add critical frontier data, let's say for a hiring manager a video, which then can be scored, which describes the job, a connection to the people that work in that area where that job is located, and for that seeker to be able to add frontier data about what they're like and what their goals are and what they want to do, so that we can actually work on the propensity to move, but also that predictive nature of what someone will do next instead of matching against their track record. So building out the arena, building out some unique scoring, building out some new profiles, both for the company and for the seeker, put that all together and focus on a flight to quality. And it's easier said than done.
Well, Jeff, no one's ever accused you of thinking small. So, connecting 16 million companies with 150 million plus job seekers sounds like just the right challenge for you and Boomband. So that's what you're going to talk about in more detail at TA Tech North America.
Yeah, I'm gonna show some of my product.
Yeah, absolutely. But you're also going to talk about your past, which is a core element of the history of this industry that you and I are in, online recruiting. And I think it might best be characterized as a trip down memory lane, because I'm a big believer in oral history. I think we can learn a lot from what's already happened.
Yep.
And certainly there are lessons to be learned in the story of Monster. So talk a little bit, if you would please, about why and how you launched the Monster Board.
So why and how is crazy. Let's just kind of go back into that time. I was a technical recruiter. I placed program analysts in a DOS and OS environment. I mapped the programmers on 128 and 495 in Boston. I tracked their movement and was a top biller at a search firm. And then talked to my dad about the experience. And he basically said, "You're just moving people around. What value are you really creating?" And
Dads.
dads are good for that. And I said, "Yeah, but the money's good." And he said, "But what is it that you really love about what you do?" And I said, "I love building out a job description that describes the jobs that I have. And I like fielding the candidates and talking with them about their experiences. And then I like what I call running with an applicant to companies. So I would understand what somebody was like, and I would call companies and say, I have this woman or this guy, and I think they are awesome." My father, in my conversation, coming back to it, he said, "Well, what's the part that you really love?" I said, "I like building these ads." And so he said, "Well, why don't you do that?" And so I worked for a company and then started a company called Addion. And I placed help wanted ads in newspapers all over the country, mostly in New England. And any given week, I'd place 500 help wanted ads. And I had the biggest tech clients, biggest healthcare clients. I had Mass General and Beth Israel Hospital. I had Wellfleet was one of my biggest clients, and Wellfleet was placing full page ads about every 3 or 4 weeks in the Boston Globe. They came to me at the end of 1992, beginning of 93, and said, "The ads aren't working and we're growing fast. And what are you going to do about it? Because you are our agency that does human resource communications. You've got to not just rely on the Boston Globe Help Wanted section." And maybe I save a little story for the day, but let me just tell you about the environment that we were in. Display ads were getting more expensive. Help Wanted was by section. It was a little counterintuitive, like tech went here and healthcare went there. It's fine. It was narrow distribution. It was just in Boston, so you could only get candidates both in the distribution of the globe, but also the ad was for one day. So very quickly the shelf life would be gone, and the posting performance was local candidates, and we had exhausted the local pool. And so it was the perfect environment. Supply was drying up. So there was scarcity of talent. At the same time, when people were getting PCs on their desktop, email was introduced and was starting to be used. And the internet browser was introduced while I was working on this idea of doing a bulletin board system to try to come up with a new solution for my biggest clients. While I was doing that, Mark Andreessen at the University of Illinois basically invented Mozilla, which was the first browser. It allowed me to use graphics, and I had this idea, a big idea, a monster idea, and I was building a bulletin board, so it was called the Monster Board. And so that's the beginning of the process. It was like the perfect storm of tech, internet, low supply, high demand, and a frustration that was really noisy in the marketplace, both from seekers and from employers. So jump ahead to 2025, and you have a very similar scenario where the noise of frustration coming from the seeker, like you can throw a stone and you're going to find someone that's applied for 500 jobs and has gotten no response. Recruiters are frustrated because there's basically, I describe it as like leaves blowing up against the fence. There's just thousands of applicants coming at you. If you're responsible for 10 openings, and it used to be at 100, 150 responses per opening, and now you have 1,000 applicants per opening, you're basically flooded with unqualified candidates. And so I see the same, or like you say, the historical value is that, many things are not new. They repeat themselves, but they repeat themselves with new technologies in new situations, but with a lot of commonality. And I feel it right now. The thing that convinced me to go back into this business is the thing everyone is absolutely exhausted of hearing about, which is what happened with ChatGPT in November of 2022. And you had a new way to learn and ingest and parse information, and that understood context of the English language. And I've been following all the resume parsers for years. And I think the best resume parser honestly got to around 82, 84%, which basically meant 18% wrong. 18% wrong was very frustrating. So people felt that the databases were not good quality. So with ChatGPT, you enter a new era. And I was just at a big conference, and the kind of frustration about talking about AI was very clear in conversations, but the reality is that it's going to change everything. And I think people know it at this point, but aren't sure how it's going to impact their job, aren't sure how it's going to be applied into their companies. And I think it's just like right now saying, I'm not interested really in the impact of AI is kind of saying I'm not interested in the impact of internet. And that was the first 1,000 conversations I had with companies when I started Monster.
That's a good segue into something that's always intrigued me about your early days with Monster. Um, as you may recall, I was writing a column for the Wall Street Journal about these new things called job boards. So I was looking over your shoulder and the shoulders of lots of others, lots of those other early entrepreneurs. And it seems to me that the biggest challenge you guys faced was habit. It was the habit of employers to place ads. Even when they were frustrated, they kept going back to that well. And it was the habit for job seekers to open up the classified ads. That's how you found a job. So talk a little bit, if you will, about your campaign, because I remember you getting up on stage at multiple conferences and looking people in the eye and saying newspapers are dead as far as recruiting is concerned, and you got a lot of pushback because of habit. People have been
Yeah.
doing it for years.
You know, keep me on track here because there's a lot. The the thing that's popping into my head right now is I went and visited 73 newspapers, and I had some. I had an early investor in Monster that in TMP Worldwide, and Andy McKelvey and I. He bought my company, and he and I, at my recommendation, went to all the big newspapers in the country and gave them presentations about Monster. And our idea was that we would partner with the back end of the newspapers, like we were partnering with the back end of companies doing recruitment advertising, which is what TMP had rolled up, including my ad agency, which was called Addion. And the newspapers all said maybe. And this is what reminded me of what you just shared. Maybe is it just sucks. It's not no, it's not yes. Maybe is the death knell, because maybe is the thing that just makes you wait and waste time.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening right now is everyone is talking about AI, maybe. And I'm thinking if we would just say yes, that it will open up an entirely new opportunity for us. I was introduced at the Newspaper Advertising Association of America. I was their keynote speaker, and they introduced me as the number one category killer of in the newspaper of all time. And that was the way I got introduced before I went up on stage. Probably 800 newspaper people. And the thing I talked about was maybe that I had given a chance. I don't know, this sounds weird. I had offered the opportunity to partner with me, and it could have, it could have avoided creating Career Builder, which, by the way, became the competitor of Monster, which was the newspaper's back end, and which even to this day, I think, never had the soul of the machine the way that Monster did. I think it's exciting that Career Builder and Monster just got together and decided to make a new company. I heard through the grapevine that after much deliberation, that their new name is Monster Builder. And it just made me smile. That feels like a bigger version of maybe. And so that's a story for our conference we can discuss. But I think this idea of the transition, what made it happen. At the beginning, I posted probably about 300 free jobs on Monster. And the immediate experience wasn't good, kind of like an agentic agent coach right now is not a good experience. The first job postings that were on Monster, like this is crazy. It just seems so basic now. But companies said, I'm getting no resumes. And I was like, what do you mean no resumes? I can see the resumes. I'm faxing out the resumes that are coming to you, and I'm mailing them to you in a manila envelope. I know you're getting resumes. Yeah, but they're from Peru and they're from India. They're not from 495 and 128 in Boston. And I was like, yeah, you now are actually recruiting in a global marketplace. And they were like, okay, take my jobs off. Maybe. Right. And so for a number of companies, including some very big companies, they basically had us remove the jobs because they were working differently there had to be a new visualization of that process at the beginning. The other thing that happened is Monster was slow. Monster was slow because we had graphics. And everyone was telling us, including all of my team, turn off the monsters because they're making the experience too slow. And I don't know, just a little side thing. I remember taking the first Trumposaurus green monster from our artist workstation and transferring this file over to our server. It took 45 minutes to download just one image of the monster. And that's kind of indicative of the fact that there was no compression software. There was no way to basically streamline the process to be able to paint our pages in a way that would be effective for both job seekers and employers. But I stayed with it, and we kept working on the tech to allow us to have our brand. And I think that's going to probably become an important part of the monster story as we grew. And I think it's going to be an important part of the Boomband story as we grow, is how do we get that seeker message right? It's half about a better job. It's half about a better life. There's a better job out there. These are not employer messages. These are seeker messages. And that was a big part of the positioning when we started Monster. It was for the job seeker. And I'm looking forward to doing that again.
Cool. So one last question. We're already a little over, but I'm going to take some extra time if it's okay with you. If you could step back and offer your younger self. Now, you said you've been in this business 40 years, so you must have started when you were about 18, right? So if you could give your younger self a piece of advice about the best way to build a business that serves both employers and job seekers, as you've been describing, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, I suppose the first thing, I wouldn't change much. I've had a crazy life and have enjoyed every bit of it. I think that the advice I'd give myself, I probably sold Monster too early. It was really the only difference between Mark Cuban and I back then is he had broadcast.com, I had monster.com. Monster had a viable business model and was profitable. And because I had angel investors in my ad agency, where I started Monster, I had to sell it. But because I sold to TMP and they had 13 recruitment offices in all the major cities, it gave me the distribution on the back end of Monster that really differentiated us early on and allowed us to grow. So that would be my first piece of advice that I would temper, which is maybe I sold too early. But as I'm talking to VCs now, it's more, I have more clarity that as I build the business that I won't sell it too early this time around. The second thing is I had a loose agreement with Reed at LinkedIn to buy LinkedIn in 2003. And he and I met and discussed it. And I'm happy to share more about that at the conference. But when I took this to my board, we were a public company. And so I had a board at that point, and I was the CEO, but there was a parent company, TMP, and a board. And I went to them and proposed the idea, and they said no. And so I had a terrible weekend as I reflected on that meeting, and because I thought it made sense to put LinkedIn and Monster together. LinkedIn is probably just getting better at jobs now, but it struggled, especially in the first 10 or 15 years, where the jobs part of it was not really the interesting part of their business. And so I resigned from Monster because of that situation. And Monster was everything. It was me. And so that was very challenging for me personally. I didn't have a temper tantrum. I gave 18 months notice. In the moment, I think I should have pushed differently because I don't think there was really an understanding of what LinkedIn was and what monster was. So my advice to myself would be, don't be such a wimp. I must have not presented that well. And who knows? My wife now says I would have screwed it up. I would have renamed it Monster because of the hubris that I had. And so one of the beauties, though, of talking to my younger self is that my older self gets another shot at it in a way that I have. I think some of you know this. I went to work for Ray Dalio, who runs the biggest hedge fund in the world, and I helped him with recruiting at Bridgewater, and then I helped him write his book. I didn't write it, but project manage his book, which is called Principles. And I spent 10 years learning about what people are like working in the culture of Bridgewater. And that experience, combined with my monster experience, has me much better prepared for thinking about Boomband today. So I guess that advice, 20 years later, I would say, okay, life happens the way it happens. You can't really go back and try to change something, but you can build off your experiences. And that's what I'm going to do.
Well, that's a great point, Jeff, and thank you for that. I think that's exactly what we're going to be all about at TA Tech North America and the World Job Board Forum. So it's going to be a real treat having you there. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our show. If people want to be in touch with you or learn more about Boomband, where should they go?
So my email is jeff@boomband.com. You can go to boomband.com and sign up and get a backstage pass, which will give you access to learning kind of the different tools that we're working on, and be part of our beta group. I think I just want to take a last moment and say that you guys are my people. I'm so glad to be back in this space. I've gotten some really nice feedback from everyone. And I just want to play in the space and find some joy in this process. And that's been a big driver in my life. And I'd like to bring that back into our industry.
Well, we'll look forward to that, Jeff, for sure. And to all of you out there, thanks very much for joining us at this edition of RecAd Savvy, a part of TA Tech Live. Please do join us on June 3 through 5 in San Diego, actually Oceanside, just north of San Diego, for the World Job Board Forum. We'll see you then. Bye-bye now.
You can follow me on LinkedIn as well. Cheers.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.